Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Aussie Supervision Monitoring and Support Team office hours. Today, my colleague Jane Armstrong and I are going to be talking through individual language acquisition plans and LAU plans 101. And so here on the screen, you can see the folks from the supervision and monitoring team, Jennifer, Carly, Ashley, and Julie. They are not here with us today. But those are the folks who help out with that support for IDEA. And here today, this is me, Leora Byris, Office of Special Services and Inclusive Education. And I do work as a liaison with my colleague Jane Armstrong.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jane Armstrong. I'm the ESOL English for Speakers of Other Languages State Specialist, and I work in the Office of Teaching and Learning. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Jane. So this is a really important slide to share. It really speaks to the collaboration that is super duper important for our students who are multilingual learners and who may have a disability. It also speaks to the importance of collaboration across the whole field of education. And so we try to model that at the Maine Department of Education. And this presentation today is coming out of that collaboration so that we are able to support our multilingual learners with disabilities in the way that they need in order to access their free and appropriate public education. So today we are going to be talking about the LAU plan and what that is and what the pieces are that make up a LAU plan. We're going to talk about what is an individual language acquisition plan and where that is documented in an individual education plan or an IEP. And we're going to talk about why those are important supports for our multilingual learners who have a disability.
Thank you, Leora. So we thought we would just level set with terminology and access to templates that the Department of Education has put together and is constantly iterating and updating. So the first template that we'd like to recognize here is what's called the LAU plan template and guidance document. It's linked here with a QR code. It's also linked within the slides, which you'll have access to. And a LAU plan is named after a landmark Supreme Court case called the LAU v. Nichols Supreme Court case of 1974. And the LAU plan is focused on the equal access that protects students who are multilingual learners. What's really important to know in your roles is that all Maine SIUs are required to have a school board approved LAU plan. This is public record. And a well-developed LAU plan serves as a clear and actionable guide, detailing how districts will provide meaningful language support services that protect students' rights to an equitable education access. The other template that we're going to be talking about today is what Leora spoke about earlier is the Individual Language Acquisition Plan. We refer to that as the ILAP. And this is a plan that all multilingual learners must have to meet their English language acquisition and academic content learning needs. So what we wanted to share with you today is that there are templates available for all SAUs to use as a reference and as a foundation to build from. And ILAPs are really important because they are the blueprint for what a multilingual learner needs to develop their English language proficiency. And we'll talk about how that plan intersects and interweaves with an IEP when we have multilingual learners with disabilities. So today we want you to think and be a bit reflective for yourselves with these prompts. How many of you currently serve multilingual students with disabilities? Are you familiar with an ILAP the Individual Language Acquisition Plan? And do you know where your district's LAU plan is located? It's okay if you don't have answers to these questions. These are prompts for us to pique our curiosity and to recognize that the questions will then lead us to collaborative structures and to information that is essential to ensure that our multilingual learners with disabilities have both their language and disability needs met. This slide speaks to the framework of the LAU plan. And again, there is a QR code here that can take you to the guidance document. It's really a very well outlined document that gives you an understanding of every section that's outlined here in more specificity. What's important for us to know, again, is that all Maine SAUs are required to have a school board approved LAU plan. Every component and section needs to be developed and tailored to the local level. And all identified multilingual learners in Maine public schools, as well as publicly funded multilingual learners in non-public schools, they must be administered WIDA's Access and Alternate Access test annually. And that is our required English language proficiency assessment to track expected language growth over time. The next slide speaks to the section 1, which really focuses us on the legal foundation for providing effective educational services to multilingual learners. You don't need to memorize all these and know these deeply, but it's really important to know what is required versus what is recommended. And so federal legislation under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act and the Equal Education Opportunities Act and ESSA, Every Student Succeeds Act, incorporates and embeds federal legislation for the protection and rights of multilingual learners based on these Supreme Court decisions that are outlined here: LAU v. Nichols, Plyler v. Doe, and Castaneda and Pickard. And similar to IDEA and federal legislation that protects students with disabilities, we need to ensure that we are aware of the legal foundation that's required for our multilingual learners as well. The next section of the LAU plan, after understanding the legal obligations, is the multilingual learner identification process. Again, we want to anchor this into the why. What is the legal basis and where is this coming from? This is from the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965. It's under Title I. And what's really important to understand is the role of a language use survey, which you see to your right. This is a required document for enrollment, and each school administrative unit, or SAU, must administer Maine's language use survey, which is linked here, to the family or guardian of every student pre-K through grade 12 enrolling in the SAU for the first time. So this is not a form for some, it's a form for all that needs to be in every enrollment packet, whether it's a physical packet or whether it's an online registration. These language use survey forms have been translated by the Department of Education under the federal programs team into Maine's top 29 languages. So it's important to know this is the first step in the process of the potential multilingual learner identification process. The next aspect that we need to consider in this decision tree is where English language proficiency screening occurs. So on your left, you'll see a flow chart, and the flow chart starts with the administration of the language use survey for all students. That's in the packet, and those 3 questions are answered, and they are specifically around the exposure and use of a language other than English. If that language use survey only shows English as the answer to those three questions, that flowchart goes off to the left. The language use survey is put in the cumulative folder, and the student is not screened and or classified as a multilingual learner. The flowchart to the right shows if there is a language other than English or in addition to English denoted on the language use survey. This is where a student could be identified as a potential multilingual student. We don't know yet because we haven't gotten to the English language proficiency screening. So at that point, the student is administered the English language screener. We'll talk in a minute about the specifics. And you can see again that the flowchart goes left or right, and that is determined by how the student performs on the screener. You'll see a link at the bottom, which outlines our identification and placement guidance document. And what that document outlines is what you'll see on the right, which is what is our criteria for identification. And what do we do with when a student enrolls and has a either suspected disability or an identified disability? And what we need to be sure that everyone knows is that the legal obligation to ensure access to the student's civil rights is that all students, regardless of disability, must be screened for their English language proficiency pre-K through 12. We cannot identify a student in Section 3 of an IEP without the screener having been administered and the student qualifying per the criteria that's outlined by Maine. And then that is how the student is identified as a multilingual learner. WIDA screeners and accompanying trainings are required for kindergarten through 12th grade. Pre-K screeners are determined at the local level, and they are outlined in your SAU's LAU plan. And WIDA provides an accessibility and accommodations manual that's updated yearly that provides screener checklists for accommodations and guidance for students who might need to have accommodations due to their disability. There is also very clearly identified guidance for students who are deaf and hard of hearing or blind and visually impaired. And again, at the bottom and at the end of this office hours, there'll be resources for you to be able to access these manuals. So the next section of the LAU plan is Section 3, the development of the Individual Language Acquisition Program. And embedded in that program is what we talked about as the ILAP, the Individual Language Acquisition Plan. It's required for all multilingual learners. It's a student's personalized action plan for their language development. It's developed by a student's team of educators, and parents and guardians are active participants as well. It's updated annually at the minimum, and it's shared each year with individual students, parents, guardians, and staff who are directly working with the student. This could be through an IEP meeting. This could be done with a cultural broker at a parent-teacher conference. This can be done with an interpreter. This can be done through a host of mechanisms that you at the local level determine. And the importance here is how is that plan shared when a student also has an IEP? And we'll talk more about that later with Leora. The multilingual learner language acquisition plan is a very important component as we've outlined. And what we want to showcase here, which is included in the Maine Department of Education's Identifying and Serving Multilingual Learners with Disabilities Policy and Resource Guide. If you haven't taken a peek and looked at this guide, we suggest you locate the guide, print it, and have it accessible. It is a wealth of information to how to work collaboratively as teams and what is required per law, and how you can look at an ILAP and an IEP side by side and through the lens of legal requirements, purpose, goals and services, assessment, reporting, and roles and responsibilities. Last, we want to highlight the federal legislation and regulations that are that are required for multilingual learners with identified disabilities. This graphic comes from WIDA. We are a WIDA consortia state, which means our standards, our English language development standards, professional learning, and assessment is anchored in WIDA tools. And this is a great graphic that you can download and print that shows where there are specific English language learner federal legislation laws, where there are specific laws for special education, which is the blue square, and then the green octagon or pentagon is the English learners and special education. And this is really critical because we're talking about implementing integrated supports. So we want to ensure that we're addressing both language development and disability needs, and that all must provide full and meaningful access to both language services and special education services. And that's a really important message, that we are doing both, and one does not override the other, and that the two are essential for knowing how to holistically design linguistically responsive IEP goals and how to adequately progress monitor language goals through the ILAP.
Okay, thank you, Jane. So we are going to talk through the IEP sections as they relate to a multilingual learner who has a disability specifically. So when we get to section 3 of the IEP is where we first are asked that particular piece of demographic information about the student. And so you can see 3C is the child identified as a student who's an English learner, yes or no? And then 3CI, does the child have language needs due to his or her English language proficiency level, which need to be addressed in the IEP? And what we know from people in the field is that this question can be a little bit confusing, and that IEP teams are talking through this question, but may not be completely confident in whether they're answering yes or no to 3CI. From a compliance standpoint, you just need to make sure that if you are saying yes to 3C, that when you get to section 6 of the IEP, that the ILAP, the Individual Language Acquisition Plan, is listed as an accommodation for that student. That lets the team know that this particular student is a multilingual learner and they need extra supports in order to be able to access their education. When we look at 3CI is where things can get a little bit confusing for IEP teams. And what we know is that under IDEA, it's vital that the IEP team considers all of those special factors, including limited English proficiency, and looks at those needs as they relate to the IEP. So the IEP team is going to make the decision about whether to check yes or no to 3CI. And that is, we encourage the teams to have those conversations and to make their decision based on what they know about the student, because those teams of people are the people who know the student the best. There's not, from a compliance standpoint, there's not going to be an issue with checking either yes or no, because that is above that compliance piece. Those are IEP team decisions, right? So we just want to make sure that people know that we understand, and it is being discussed at the department, that 3C and 3CI can be a little bit confusing. The compliance piece for 3C, if you check yes, please make sure that you have an ILAP in section 6. And with 3CI, we encourage you to have those conversations. And if you would like to reach out, please do so. So here we have this particular slide is talking about what I just went through. Again, that the IEP teams are going to make the decision about 3CI, and there's not going to be an issue with compliance based on what the team chooses, either yes or no. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense to folks. We really just want to make sure that everyone understands that the IEP team is responsible for that decision and we trust them to make that decision. Jane, is there anything that you want to add to these two particular slides that I just went over to clarify, or does that explanation?
I think that sounds I think it sounds great, and I think the next slide really outlines the OSEP policy letter, which I think again, where are we getting the information that is shared with IEP teams? And so I think that Leora outlined this really well. It's also documented here in the letter, and that the IEP, the determination is made on an individual basis by the participants on the child's IEP team in light of the particular disability related needs of the child. I think what we also recognize is you need to have someone who is proficient in second language acquisition and can speak to the individual language acquisition plan as a member of the IEP team. So that is an important piece that we want to share, that when we think about multidisciplinary teams, that when you have a multilingual learner and 3C is checked yes, the team needs to look around the table and ensure that there is a professional, there's a colleague. Sometimes that's the ESOL teacher. Sometimes that is the special educator who's also the ESOL teacher, who is at the table and is a part of that team to speak on behalf of that language acquisition plan and to also speak to the language needs within the IEP.
Awesome. Thank you, Jane. And we have linked the OSEP policy letter here, 2103, in case people would like to have more detail about that particular letter from OSEP. So a big part of talking about a multilingual learner who has a disability are the conversations about accommodations. What accommodations does that particular student need in order to be able to be successful in their education? And as Jane just said, the piece about the collaboration between the ESOL teacher and the special education team is absolutely vital. And it has actually also in MUSER, the Maine Unified Special Education Regulation, that people with special knowledge of the student need to be invited to the IEP team. So when we're talking about accommodations, we know that they are to help the student access their education. And for a child who's a multilingual learner, those could be listed in, well, those will definitely be listed on the IEP, and they would also be listed in that ILAP as well for more detailed information. So the people who are making the decisions about the accommodations at the IEP team should include that ESOL teacher. And it's really about identifying the barrier for that particular student and helping them get over that barrier so that they are able to be educated. And all of those decisions should be data driven and based on the evaluative needs of the student. So some things to think about as you're looking at accommodations for the student, because remember, as we're potentially doing assessments, for example, there shouldn't be accommodations necessarily that are just for assessments. Accommodations should be used regularly in the classroom so that the student knows, what they are and how they're helping them and so on. They shouldn't just be new because that would be challenging, right? So does the accommodation address the student's need? That is a very important question for the team to look at. So we want to make sure that the accommodations that we're using aren't reducing expectations, that they are enhancing the student's ability to be able to meet those expectations. And also, just to remember that accommodations should not ever be provided that would invalidate any assessments that are happening. Oops. Here we go. All right, so I have an example here of documenting in section 6 of the IEP. So if we look at the top row, we have the ILAP, the Individual Language Acquisition Plan. And that is an accommodation that can be used through classroom instruction and all different types of assessments. In this example, I just use special education as the location. It could be special education, it could be general education, it could be both. Frequency is as needed, and the duration for this particular student, section 6, coincide with the duration of the IEP. You can also see that I put in some sensory toolkit information for this particular student. They use a help card, break cards, squishies, visual supports. They have daily check-ins. And here, the weeded access accommodations. This is where you would list the accommodations that are specific to the WIDA access. So that's an important piece to remember as you're filling this out for your multilingual learner. And also, I added on the bottom collaboration between the ESOL and special education teachers. That word collaboration, and we talked about it at the beginning, is super duper important to make sure that the students that we share are getting what they need. And that collaboration is really between the ESOL teacher and the special education teacher. Those are the folks who are going to be putting their heads together to talk about what they see in each of their classrooms and what they're doing in each of those classrooms that's successful or that's not successful, that are going to help the student moving forward. So the next couple of slides, so here, pardon me. So here we have our list of resources, and these were also linked, or some of them were linked on the various slides as well. So we have our Office of Special Services and Inclusive Education, and then the Office of Teaching and Learning, specific to the multilingual learners with disabilities. There's whole pages about resources and assistance for those folks on the Department of Education website. There's also a link for multilingual learning, the Identifying and Serving Students Who Are Multilingual Learners with Disabilities Policy and Resource Guide. As Jane suggested earlier, if you are working with our multilingual students with disabilities, that's a really great resource to look at. There is a Padlet that Melissa Franz, who is the Teacher Leader Fellow for Multilingual Learners and Students with Disabilities, has started with resources. Here's a link to WIDA, and that has resources about assessment, standards and instruction, professional learning, research, resources. It also has our WIDA state page with our plan on it, and also WIDA supporting multilingual learners with disabilities. Jane, is there anything that you want to say or add about this resource page that I might have missed?
No, I think it's very comprehensive. And like Leora mentioned, our contact information is available. So if there's questions specific to multilingual programming, identification, assessment, you could email me. Leora really sits in the Office of Special Services and Inclusive Education. And so what we're modeling here today is the intersection, the collaboration that's vitally important, whether it's professional learning, whether it's site visits, whether it's emails and technical assistance or office hours. We want you all to know that you can reach out to both of us or to each of us individually, but that we have a regular cadence of meeting and reviewing students and our data to ensure that students are growing linguistically over time and are meeting their targets, and their IEP teams and monitoring and progress monitoring are happening through that lens of linguistically responsive IEP goals for multilingual learners. So thank you so much, Leora, and thank
Yeah.
you for the opportunity to collaborate with the Aussie office hours.
All right. So I'm just going to finish up by just quickly going through the slides that the federal team regularly includes in their trainings. So many of you, I'm sure, who are watching this recording are familiar with them. So they always include resources for IDEA, user, the procedural manual, and the procedural safeguards. So those are links to those resources. The supervision, monitoring, and support page for SAUs is right here. If you would like more information about what that process looks like. There are information sheets linked here, self-assessment forms, and the quick reference documents for the folks who are in the monitoring cohort. As you know, hopefully, the professional learnings are posted on this particular web page, including this recording, which will be there shortly. This is their professional development schedule. And here we are with our ILAP LAU plan. And this is listing what they're doing for the rest of the year. And the previous ones are posted. So here are links to IEP and related forums, educator and administrative resources, and family and caregiver resources. This is for you to be able to get a contact hour for watching this recording. You can either fill out the form or use the QR code, and Carly will get back to you. Oh my gracious, there we go. And so here we are. Here's Jane and myself and our email addresses, and we are happy to answer any questions that may come up, and we are happy to help you out in whatever way that we can. And thank you. This is the information for the federal monitoring team and the Department of Education social media pages. Thank you very much. Please reach out to us if you have questions or concerns, and we are happy to help you out.